talk about in the next couple of minutes is sort of for anyone who's not a producer or may not be familiar with how producers finance themselves, sort of give you the context, what's the problem that we're looking at, and then also how we at Algrano, together with producers, are trying to solve it or have started solving solve it. I'm very glad I have somebody here who's much better suited to talk about producer financing by himself, because I'm sharing the stage with Fernando Patiño from Colombia, who is a producer working with us, and who will also tell you from his perspective how it looks like as a producer, how do I finance, at what cost, what are the options that I have available. I was told to include this slide in case anyone needs translation. I'll give you a couple of seconds to scan it if you need it, but if not, I'll move on. And I want to move on with sort of giving you the big picture of what we're looking at when it comes to financing and lending in the agricultural sector overall. So there's an estimate of $106 billion funding gap that you see in agriculture. So that includes coffee, it also includes other commodities, but that's the gap you're looking at, meaning there's a need of a certain number of financing to run the operations in the agriculture. And then there's what's actually available. And the difference between those numbers is that gap. It's a big number. It's a lot of zeros. To give you some idea of how big that number is, it's roughly equivalent to the GDP of a country like Costa Rica or Ecuador or Guatemala. The main point is it's huge. It's essentially, to a large extent, unsolved, because in an ideal world, that will go down to zero. Not very surprising that part of this gap is also existing in coffee, and that we've known, or many people, if you're long enough in coffee, you're probably aware of many producers struggling with cash flow. We have roasters struggling with cash flow as well, where it's like it's a topic everywhere, right? Or it's an issue everywhere. But whatever you have on the roaster side, it's probably 10 times as bad on the producer side, because unlike a roaster in the US or Europe, there's a lot less options on how you get financing in the first place, with people willing to finance you at a rate that you can actually sustain. So that's one side of the puzzle, right, or of the gap, is that all those producers are actually, they need financing, because throughout the year, they accrue all those costs that they have for the harvest, that they have for production, and only at the very end of the harvest cycle, they would export the coffee and get paid for it. So for a large part of the year, they have cash going out of the business, and only at the very end of it, it comes back in. So that's one side why they need financing. The other side is the people that want to provide that financing for a big chunk of the producers, especially smaller ones. The math doesn't really work, in the sense of, as an illustration. So this is from a paper that we found from a big international lender, saying if I give you a loan for $250K, I'll make some money on a closing fee. So doing the deal in the first place, I'll get paid $2,500 for that, and I'll make some money on the interest. So roughly charging a 10% interest rate. Usually, if I give you a $250K loan, you won't use it, the $250K, over the entire period. So I'm actually not making 10% on the $250K, but something roughly half of that. So I'll make about $15K in revenues. If I look at, from the bank's perspective, what costs I have, I'm going to spend $30K just to figure out if I finance that producer in the first place. So I'll go visit the farm, I'll come through the financial statements, I do the due diligence, and then once I have done it, I will follow up. I need reports, I need to monitor if everything is going according to plan, and that roughly is a fixed cost that costs me $30K. So just after this, the bank can already tell you, I'm not going to make $250K loans, because just after the first cost item, I'm already in the negative. And from there, it only gets worse. I have my own cost of capital, so I have to pay whoever gives me the funds. So I have to pay them interest rates, and that's actually quite low. Or there's 2% that you are paying as a bank on the interest, but you're charging 10, so there's a big gap. And then there's the issue of some of them actually won't pay me back, so I'll have some defaults that cost me as well. So overall, if I do a $250K loan, I'll lose $40K. So at a bank, I will not do it unless I get grants or some other support that helps me fill up that gap. Or I lend you much more than 250K, sort of from a million or above, because that's the only way to make that work. Because those costs won't increase, they're one-offs. So if I increase the overall loan, I'll make more money on it, and eventually I could cover the gap. So that's where the gap is coming from. So producers needing the money and banks are being blocked about giving out money, especially smaller ticket size loans. I'll hand it over to Fernando for his perspective.
Thank you, Florian. Can you guys hear me? Can you listen to me? Okay. Hi, how are you? So my name is Fernando from Majestic Coffee. I'm proud to say that our company is being partnering with Algrano a few years, and we're getting right up together. I'm here to talk a little bit about the problem, okay? About the finance problem in the rural areas in different countries that produce coffee. So generally, they talk about the problems that coffee producers are suffering. We always address price, but I'm here to talk about a second problem, and that second problem is access to finance. Okay, I wouldn't say it's as much important as pricing, but it is really important, really matters. Okay, so I will talk a little bit about my perspective and my experience in Colombia. Okay, so in Colombia, 69.1% of the people that order coffee, they have access to credits. So there's still the 30% of people that they don't have access to formal credit, formal loans. Okay, basically 98% of the credits are concentrated in a bank that belongs to the government. Was that was refers where is relatively lower than banks in Colombia. However, it's much higher in other programs, Algrano, and we will talk a bit about that, and we will see some numbers about this. So the problem with this is that we still have a 30% of coffee producers that they can't access formal credit. So they know where do they go with they go where with the shark goes by loan sharks. They access the asset one on loan sharks. Interest really high interest rates that goes from 200% till 500% easy a year. Mm, as well as the high interest rates, we could see as well that borrowing money is a complex process, and not many producers understand these hidden costs that the banks just put it there. Actually, many of us probably we don't even know what the hidden costs are. Right. Okay. Yes, the loan sharks. So I put here 200 to 300%, and that's pretty listen. That's pretty conservative. If you as a producer, you need money. Uh, if you go to a loan shark, the meaning you will get is 200%. If you talk to private banks in Colombia, the average interest rate today is 25, only 62%. Uh, Finario nowadays is almost 20%. For example, if I compare all this, we are seeing a super wide range. We got 300%, we got 90%. But then if you have Rotors Capital with an interest rate at 12%, that's much better, right? Okay, so why do coffee producers need money? No, why do they need to ask loan? It's very simple. You sell your product. Colombia, the producer sells parchment, right? The unit of measurement of parchment coffee is called carga or load. It's 125 kgs of parchment coffee. But if you want to sell your product, you gotta pick your coffee right. So in Colombia, from the 100%, the production costs 56% more or less, 55 or 60%. The production costs are concentrated in picking the coffee because you gotta pay the people that are going to pick the coffee, and that is actually super, super, super expensive. So most of the coffee producers, they ask money, they request money uh, right before they start picking coffee because they need to pay to the workers. And then you got a cycle that generally takes 1 to 2 months after you start picking your cherries, you process. If it's a washed coffee, you need to pulp it, or wash it, dry it, and stabilize it. So let's say that it takes 1 to 2 months to do the whole process. So you need money, you request money, and after 1 or 2 months, you gotta pay back. Okay, so here is where we see that basically every single person that produces coffee needs money, and of course, I personally don't know anyone, but just the capital with the cash to pay, and I don't know people that don't need to request money from the banks. Okay. So how does this impact interest spreads affect the coffee producers? We will see an example. Okay, I told you about the unit of measurement called load or carga. Any of you remember how many kilos is a carga? Sorry, 125 kilos of parchment coffee. So the reason why they call it load or carga is because in Colombia it was super traditional to use mules to take the coffee bags. They had one here, one the other side, and they took those coffee bags from probably the fields to the farm or even to the sea to sell that coffee. And the maximum capacity was 125. So it was its maximum load. We still talk about that, about load. Okay, so this example is using prices of a few weeks ago. The prices are changing graphically, but this is a pretty good example of how the finances of a coffee producer work if they ask money from, let's say, a runner or a loan shark or a uh, a private bank. The internal cost of a carga in Colombia is roughly 630 US dollars. So a producer goes copper and they pays 130 US dollars. Could be a little bit more or less depending on the physical quality of the cup. Okay, the less defects, the higher they get paid. But it's pretty much this. Uh, in this example, the selling price is 750 US dollars, which means that the coffee grower earns 121 US dollars per carga. Do you know how many cargas per hectare a producer can produce in an average? Or how many bags in Colombia? You have idea how many bags of coffee per hectare in general you see? How many? 30? Someone else? So depending on the productivity and the variety, it could be 20, 30, up to 40. That's a lot. Uh, if we, if we refer to cargas, yep, it's 20 cargas more or less. Okay, because from one carga you get 1.3 bags of coffee. Okay, so in this example, we requested money 3 months before we sell the coffee. So we our return is 3 months. So we said that in this example, the producer earns 121 US dollars, which is pretty good in comparison to what we've got before, right? Producers, they were not earning money during years. So you need money. Okay. I go to the bank uh, and I need to pay my interest rate, which is 25.62% a year. So I need to pay $40 to the bank at the end of the exercise. So his profit before interest was 120, and then the bank will take basically one third this. Okay, so it's basically you just work very hard and you get two thirds, and the bank basically takes one third. Yes. If you the same with Finagro, with the government bank, won't be that bad, but they will still take almost 30%, 25% of what you worth. Okay? If you do it with Algrano, that number plunges, goes from $30 to $19. If we see it in terms of uh, money, I'll say it this way: if you're a producer and if you have only $2 of coffee, uh, asking money from a bank in comparison to requesting money from, let's say, Algrano, you will save with Algrano more than 2 minimum salaries. So you get more than 2 months of work, basically just save the interest rates. So basically, most of us, many coffee farmers, most of them, they don't think about it because they don't see the numbers this way, but it makes the difference. It makes the difference. It is a big problem. It is a big deal. And it is a big deal that the countries like in Colombia, the credits, the interest rate is really, really high. Are you guys from the United States? You're from here? And what's the average interest rates here? Yeah, it's not 9 or 10. Wow, that's amazing. That is really good. So this makes the difference. It makes the difference, and the reason why I'm here speaking with Florian is because this and this program, what they're doing is amazing. It makes the difference for us. It makes a difference.
Right. So the big question is, how do we do it, right? How can we essentially finance Fernando at a lower rate than other guys can? And you have to give me some rope here. I'm gonna make a little detour into what our ground is, or what we've been doing over the years. One of the big things that we strongly believe in is that technology as of today in the coffee sector is very much underutilized or underinvested. There's a lot of focus on other programs in terms of education, in terms of agronomy. There's a lot of money going into that. There's relatively little going into technology, and certain things you can, or if you use it properly, technology can give you back a lot. So what we've seen in the past 10 years of starting a Algrano, the thing we've always been doing is being very open about who gets what and what costs what, and letting producers, for example, set the prices of their coffee. It's not us selling them. And giving a breakdown of, if you get an FOB price of $9, here's what the roaster will pay on top for freight, for importing, for financing. So both sides understand where the money is going, but also how both sides are operating essentially. But it's not just on each of those pairs of relationships, but you see it, what's happening left or right. So you're seeing for similar coffees as producers that you're selling, how is that price left and right of me in the same origin, in the same quality range? So how do I set prices? Because if you have to set them as well, you have to think about, well, where do I set to? If I set them too high, I'm not going to sell anything. If I set them too low, I'm essentially leaving money on the table. So how do I do that? And we're using the Algrano technology and data to share a lot of that data across the board, both from the roaster and on the producer side. And there's a really interesting paper that's not from coffee, which says, well, investments in technology can get criticized at origin because the thinking is, what you need to tackle first is health, it's education, it's investments in sort of the basic needs. And what gets underestimated is that's sort of the excuse to let's do technology later. Once we solve that, and then we can, because technology is kind of a luxury thing. I don't know, iPhones and smartphones, that's not a basic need. So let's solve education first and then move on to the fancy stuff. Whereas you can use technology to impact essentially the income of a lot of the people that work in the agricultural sector quite massively. So if you don't price your coffee directly, or if you learn how to price it correctly, there's a big lever in terms of how much more money you'll make, because that determines your income ultimately, and determines your living standard. And that's a much bigger lever than anything else you can do by taking an extra class or doing other things. So just to get me right, there's nothing wrong with investing in education, but we think like certain things in the technology sector get under invested because it's kind of deferred to, let's do that at a later stage. So what those guys in their paper have been doing is the technology they look at is mobile phones. So this is like 20 years ago. And they look at fisheries or fishermen in the Indian Ocean. So pre-mobile phone, if you're a fisherman in India, you would go out to sea, you catch your fish. And then while you're outside of the ocean, you have to decide which port you're going to go to and sell your fish. And it's a bit of a gamble because you don't know exactly where the buyers will be on that given day. So you have to take a bet, right? And that means depending on which port you go, if you go to the port and you're the only seller there and there's lots of buyers, you effectively have a monopoly. You'll get a very high price for your fish. If you go to the village where there's no buyer and plenty of other sellers, the price will be way lower. In economist terms, that's a violation of what's called the law of one price, which says that if you sell the same thing at the same time at roughly the same location, it should get the same price. If you look at villages that are something like 10 to 20 miles apart at the ocean in India, they have wild fluctuations. Like the prices are 4 times as high in one place and in the next one, because they can't coordinate where to go, right? So what they did is, over time in India, they would introduce mobile coverage. So all of a sudden, in certain regions, they would have mobile phones and they're out in the ocean and they can write to their friend and say, which village should I go to? Where are the buyers? And all of a sudden they can communicate and can make a decision, not betting on something, but knowing where the buyers will be. And they started doing that in the top left, and then they introduced mobile coverage a bit further south. And sort of the researchers looking at this exploited this because they're saying there's a period before mobile phone, the period after, and I can see what happens as mobile phones get introduced. And what happens is these are price charts in the different regions of what you're getting for your fish on any given day on any given price, and the dispersion of it in terms of how much does it fluctuate. And you see it fluctuates a lot. And then in region 1, they introduce mobile phones. They do the same thing a bit later in the next region, and again in the next region. And the dispersion largely goes away, right? The other effect that they found is price thing is one thing. The other thing is waste. If you're fishing, anything you're not selling on that day, you throw it away. So if you go to the wrong village and you're not selling it, there's a lot of fish just ending up in the trash. And by introducing mobile phones, not only would the price dispersion go away, but they would also, like, all the fish would essentially find a buyer. So there's almost zero waste after the introduction of mobile phones. And that meant there's a lot more fish out there. There's consistent pricing. So both the fishermen actually profit from getting stable prices and selling more, but so does the consumer, because there's a bigger supply of fish now because it gets efficiently allocated. So that's one example of having very, basic technology that changes local markets quite significantly. So when we looked at back to financing coffee producers, right? We talked to them and we did some research about what are you struggling with, and then the main thing, of course, is access to financing in the first place, or if you get access, what are you paying for it? So that's the main one, right? The other one is a timing issue. Like if you need cash and if you need liquidity, you don't have a lot of time. If you do applications with banks, it takes weeks, months, up to a year. Like I think the most extreme error was up to a year to take a decision. So for the bank to come back to you and say, yes, we'll do it, or no, we won't. And the third one is complexity. So even if you get the deal, what are you actually paying? And you're paying the interest rate for sure. But there can be other fees in there as well. So there's origination fees, there's disbursement fees, there's non-utilization fees, If you pay back early, there's a penalty on pay back early. So it's kind of hard to assess upfront of, if I take this, what is it gonna cost me in dollar amounts, right? Not in percentages. And so when we looked at it, essentially we want to make all those problems go away. One thing being competitive pricing. So how can be the 30K we saw at the very beginning that a bank is spending on due diligence? How can we avoid spending 30K per producer just to figure out whether we finance them? And we're in a pretty good position here because we already work with all those producers. So we already do business with them. We ship coffee with them. We know their clients. We know if they ship on time. We know if they have quality claims, all of that. So we're not starting from zero and having to spend 30K to figure out if they're, reliable. The second thing, if you don't have to start collect data only when they request for money, but you've already collected the data and you already have your opinion, you can give feedback within a couple of days. So you can do disbursements within 2-3 days instead of waiting for months until somebody has money in the bank. And the third thing is, again, because we know a lot about them, we'll have a pretty good idea for how long the financing period will last. So instead of telling them it's 10 or 12% a year, we'll tell them, we pay you today, we expect this to ship on date X. Here's the dollar amount that will cost you, and that's the only fee you'll pay. It won't change. So you can decide whether you want to take that deal or not, but you have absolute certainty about the cost of what it's going to cost you. It's not going to change down the line. It's not a calculation that you'll have to do. So we thought about this conceptually. We asked the producers that we work with, how would this help you across which dimension, right? So we asked them about, so rate from 0 to 10, how much you agree with the statement that prepayment would actually help me simplifying the financing of my organization. It would benefit or help my profitability. So what Fernando showed you before. It will help me grow faster if I have the capital. I could sell more coffee directly to roasters in Europe and the US. I'd have more bargaining power in the negotiations with any of the buyers because I'm not having a night here because I need the cash tomorrow. Both at origin but also internationally. And there was one question that some of the producers that don't have access to financing, they cover the liquidity pickup by selling coffee cheaply at origin, cash on hand. So they're leaving money on the table in terms of the price, so what they're getting back is immediate cash. And then whatever remains, they try to sell internationally, that's higher prices. And essentially what you're seeing here is almost all of this is above 8 out of 10. That is like, you rarely see people agreeing so much with so many different statements on any topic. So we knew, okay, we're on to something here. So how do we do it? Like, the general thing is we use a lot of the internal data. The specific thing is, if you do this with a lender, you typically have 3 parties involved. One is the producer. One is the buyer of the coffee, can be an importer, can be a roaster. And one of them is the lender. And from a bank's perspective, they don't want to lose money. So they try to minimize the risk as much as they can. And the way they do this is, well, they do a due diligence on the farmer. They'll go visit the farm, they'll look at the financial statements, they come through all of this. In many ways, very similar to what a bank in the US would be. And then in return for doing that due diligence between the farmer and the lender, they'll get the prepaid. In the second step, the producer will deliver the coffee to the buyer. And once the buyer has it, he'll pay back the lender. So it's not, what you're betting on as a lender is not, does the producer have the cash flow to pay me back eventually? It's how likely is it he'll deliver that coffee on time. So that's almost, it's very little to do with the financial statements. So they kind of know that it's hard to assess producers through financial statements, especially if you have markets like today, where prices over a couple of months fluctuate so widely. If you submit an income statement from end of last year as a producer to a bank, everybody knows the world is very different today, and it's just 3 months later. So they're kind of, you don't want to take too much risk here. You want to be super safe, and you probably over-index on the risk that you're taking, because you're not really looking at how likely is it they'll deliver the coffee. You're looking at financial statements and other things. On the other hand, and nobody cared about this too much in the past, but the bank also takes another risk, which is, can the buyer pay? Does he have the cash flow? And historically, that's never been an issue. And these are the companies in Europe and the US, and they're well capitalized and so on. But it's also, they can't really ask any information about this, because this guy will say, I don't have a contract with you. I'm not obliged to show you anything. You have a contract with the producer and you do whatever you want, but I'm not showing you my books because I'm not getting anything from you. I'm just wiring the money somewhere else at the end of the day. And that's a potential risk, right? What we're doing is essentially saying we're better at pricing the one risk, which is, we know, because we work with producers, we know how likely is it Fernando will deliver on time and will deliver the coffee that was contracted. So that's one thing we're not looking at, can Fernando repay us? We're looking at, will he deliver the coffee on time? Because we know from his past shipments whether he was late or not. We know whether his customers were happy with the quality that he delivered. We know how he's grown over the past. We have a lot of touch points and data points with him that allow us to assess how likely is it that they'll deliver every time. And the other risk, we don't really have at all, because we're the buyers of the coffee at some point. So we're not concerned about us paying ourselves, because we're the same entity, right? So that piece here of importer paying the bank, we don't have it because we're both the bank and the importer. So we use a lot of data to essentially model how late somebody will deliver, or whether they'll deliver on time. And we can do this for any producers that we work with, right? And we got it to a point where it's 6 months ahead of time. We know up to plus minus 2 days when a shipment will leave. So at this point, we're very concise or very precise on how long will we actually lend money to a producer. And we can run those models and look at, is somebody in a high risk category? Is there a medium risk category or a low risk category? The high risk, we essentially say, you'll have to improve first before we're going to prepay you. The medium risk is, yeah, we can do it, but the terms will reflect that it'll be more expensive than if you delivered on time. And the low risk ones, essentially, they get the best possible deal. And they also know this, right? They know this is how we evaluate it. This is how we have to evaluate it as well, because ultimately we also have to pay for the money that we're taking on. But if you improve, this thing, it will get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper for you. So if you compare those two options with what we're doing now, or how we solve those problems, right? We have essentially two categories: what we do with withdrawal capital and any other lender. And it starts with the minimum ticket size. So we don't have a minimum ticket size or a minimum loan amount. I think the lowest we've done is $2,000 or something like this. For lenders, because they have this fixed cost, they essentially have to start around $1 million. Otherwise, it's hard for them to make it work.
You had an upper limit?
Sorry?
You had an upper limit?
We do have an upper limit, mainly because we don't have unlimited funds to pour into it. So the upper limit is around 70% of a container. Or the upper limit is 70% of the FOB value of the shipment. And if that's on the container, that's roughly somewhere between 100 and 120K at this point, or it's risen a lot as well. But that's mainly driven by how much money we have available to put into this. On the cost side, so here we're very transparent. We tell them this is exactly what we're going to charge you, because we're pretty certain about when that ship will leave. And it's based on essentially 1% interest per month for roughly 12 a year. Whereas with other lenders, you have those variable structures, you have an interest rate, but there's typically other fees as well. So it's a bit harder to understand it. In terms of collateralization or how we peg how much money we'll give someone or prepay someone, we base it on the FOB value of the coffee that we're buying. If you're a bank, either you don't know the FOB value on the underlying contracts, or you want to have a buffer, so you might tie it to the C market instead of the FOB value of the actual coffee, but they might do FOB as well. And then durations is typically, other lenders typically do 12 months rolling. What we do is like, we'd say up to 6 months ahead of the shipment, you can get it. And if you have multiple shipments in a year, you can roll it over and over and over and over. And sort of the prepayment for the first one covers the expenses that you have for the first one. You keep rolling it. The final one is like, how quickly can you give them feedbacks? So that's the thing that's really appreciated by a lot of people, because within 48 hours or so, we can tell them we can want to do it or we don't, as opposed to weeks or months. What we've done over time, so this was for a long time in the pilot phase, because there was a chicken and egg thing, and everybody said, "This looks great. Do you have a track record?" And us saying, "Well, we can build a track record if you guys give us some money to work with." So for a long time, we worked with our money to essentially build track records, and now we have more partners that essentially are chipping in based on that track record. We've done about 100 deals at this point. The average ticket size is very low, right? If you go back to the very beginning where we said a 250K loan doesn't work for a bank, our average is around 60K now. So it's way, way lower than the average ticket sizes that you see elsewhere. We've done about 5 million at this point, and the producers use it for roughly 2 months. So roughly 2 months ahead of shipment is where you have most of the costs, because you're in the harvest, you have your pickers, you're spending more money than in other periods of the year. So anything around 2 months ahead of shipment is what they use it for. And I'll let you cut.
So that woman over there, Fernando year, she is a coffee producer, and she is a leader in Huila. Her farm is located in a municipality known as La Plata, Huila. Have any of you been to Huila before, Colombia? So that's up the south. Is a personal reel that produces basically 40% of the coffee that comes from Colombia. Her farm is called Finca Santa Lucia, and she's quite famous. She's quite recognized because she's been empowering women since 2007, doing great subs. Has been the International Women Couple Association to Colombia, and a lot more she have done. And she is one of the reasons why I'm standing here, because she inspired me many years ago. She is my business partner's mother. I basically be with her during many years, and I know her process. They started very young, so we had a pure hendas farm many years ago. She had a problem, and the problem was banks didn't give her money, because her assets were just two hectares. She didn't have the capacity of being reliable for a bank, and she struggled a lot. She struggled a lot financially. Every single year during harvest time, she had a lot of troubles, of struggles, and she got money many times on these loan sharks. And if we saw numbers before with loan sharks, it basically means one. You gotta pick, you gotta do it because you have the coffee trees in the trees, but you know that you will lose money basically. Uh, so that was her problem, but this is a problem for hundreds of thousands of coffee farmers. But this changed a few years ago. Banking, she could access banking system, and she could access to credit. She started borrow money from banks, and it gave her capacity of basically being profitable. What she did, and I find it awesome, is that she started doing development and research. So she bought seeds of varieties such as pink bourbon or geishas, etc. And after 3 4 years, these trees produced, which gave her, a better financial life, because if you sell these varieties, probably you get paid better, and that's good for you. And then she started the natural process, honey process, and she met many people that considered her coffee as an amazing coffee, and they started buying her coffee, and that improved her quality of life a lot. And I've seen that happy, and actually that's happening through our brand as well, because we sell Givers coffee on our grotto. We basically distribute it to many roasteries in Europe. Awesome. Uh, so you know, we basically found a solution to a finance problem, and I saw with my eyes how a person can can switch from having a difficult life with a low quality of life, even though they produce high quality coffees, to you know having a successful financial life, producing amazing coffees, and basically access to finance made the difference in her case. Okay. So as I told you, nowadays she's a producer that inspires many people, and I'm what and he is new. Diego, he he's a young guy. He's a coffee producer in Santa Maria, Huila. Santa Maria is another municipality on the north of Huila that um, is recognized for being the first city in Colombia to produce specialty coffees, to talk about specialty coffees. It's beautiful, and he's very young. And he is an example of how having access to credit could improve the quality of life of coffee producer. So Diego is one of our partners. We've been together for, you know, a few years, and together we've been working with different coffees such as natural blends, honeys, and then infused co-fermented coffees. Uh, so we sell Diego's coffee through Algrano's platform, and he basically has no resources to work. Okay, he buys coffee cherries from other neighbors. Thanks to Algrano, we have the leverage of basically taking money rapidly in short, in 3 5 days, and then processing coffee and send ship that coffee straight to our clients in Europe mainly. And uh, it's been 2 years since we started with Diego on our brands platform. We've sold many bags. You can see how Diego's life was improving rapidly, as well as learning new processes and processing methods and experimenting. His quality of life has improved. And again, this guy, he is a young leader. You know that in rural areas we have this problem of really the generational grief. Lots of young people, they want to move from the farm to the city. Why? I don't know. But this guy is inspiring people in his region to stay because they see that coffee can be profitable if you're smart enough, if you put your effort, and of course if you have finance. So when these examples I've learned basically the fair financing doesn't only allow you to produce coffee, to grow coffee, but only to grow dignity. That's what we want. That's what we want for coffee producers. Yes.
Is it mine? I thought it was yours. But I can close it. Yeah. So to uh, echo what Fernando said, I think what we're trying to do with the prepayments that we're doing with producers is that I think that the experience that we've had is like producers are actually very good at cash flow planning because they have to be. Uh, so what we want to do with Global Capital is basically being very clear about they know how cash flow works, but how the mechanics work of a prepayment and what it's going to cost you. Be transparent about it. Say maybe you need it, maybe you don't. Maybe you need a certain amount of money, but don't take more than you need, for example. But giving them that perspective, giving them the stability and certainty that they have someone that they can ask for prepayment, so they know any contract that I sell through Algrano is by default eligible for prepayments if I've been, or if I have the track record. And so giving them also, we're going to be here next year and the year after that, and it essentially, and we can give you feedback in a short amount of time. And ultimately, what we're studying now, right, because we have to live it to the fund still, there's still a lot of producers that we can't finance because we don't have to find, you don't have to fund. And we use those to essentially have people like Fernando who get the financing, and then we have a control group that didn't get the financing because we didn't have enough money. And by seeing how they evolve, we'll get a clearer picture over time of the effect of financing itself. So does it make the producers more profitable? Does it allow them to grow quicker? Because this is the underlying theory, right? If you enable people, or if you give people access to financing, they can optimize their operations, they'll be more profitable, but they can also take on money early when they don't have it to invest it and grow further or faster down the line. And that's the theory. By having those two groups, both in the past where we did prepay at all, and now where we prepay some of them and others not, we have comparisons and could see, is it really paying off, or to what extent? We're pretty sure it's paying off. The question is more by how much. Ultimately, could then also show this to others and go to others and say, hey, I think this is also a good investment, or it's a win for the producer for sure. If he's more profitable and grows, can be a win for an investor, because we generally, from what we've learned so far, is people are over-indexing a bit on the risk, because it's happening in the countries that we're not that used to, right? We're like to far away, and if you look, income statements and balance sheets look different in those countries than they look at places. But if you realize that actually what you're doing is betting on somebody sticking to their contract and delivering a coffee to a roaster that they've been working with for 5 years, that's de-risking the entire thing. So we've seen exactly, I was the 100 deals of C, and we had one default. So way below the 10 to 15% default rates that are seen in other cases. So now it's more about how can we scale it? How can we give people more access, but also eventually increase the numbers, because all the producers are growing with us. So they're needing more and more and more money the more coffee they sell, right? And that's what we're currently looking at. That's all we had to say, but we're happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Are these both currency or USB loans at both?
USD, because so we're buying single service FOB, and it's typically in dollars, and there's very few exceptions.
Do you have a sense of the typical profile of someone who's receiving money at a certain producer of a certain size, or a quarter at a hand a favor of the who or whatever, or someone for it?
It's super diverse. Part of the diversity comes from the origin country or how they're set up, right? Cooperatives are much more prevalent in certain origin countries than in others, and that might be exporters or washing stations. So very diverse. Also diverse in the size up to a point. Like if you work with bigger cooperatives in Brazil, eventually, or we had cases where a cooperative started working with us and very small, they grew, and they grew out of this, in the sense that eventually they did get a bank that would finance them for much larger volumes that we can do. So they grew out of it. So there's a cap. If the producer organization has a certain size, they'll have access to other funding, funding mechanisms. But below that, it's so sometimes it's 2K, sometimes it's 100K that we're prepaying. Very diverse on where we do it, or we do it all over the place, which also helpful for us, because different regions harvest at different points in time, until they meet the money at different points in time. So by the time Brazil needs it, we don't need an Ethiopia anymore, for example. So we can also effectively use the money across the world as we sort of travel through the different market cycles. But yeah, overall very diverse. I think that the one thing that can complicate it is we buy from next to whoever exports the coffee, right? Because we buy it FOB. So from a regulatory perspective, we also have to pay the exporter the prepayment, so it has to go through them. At the same time, like whoever is the producer, he's the one, it can be both the exporter or the producer requesting it, but both of them are always in the loop if there's any prepayment happening, so any producer would know when we paid the export. So he knows, okay, I should get my prepayment.
Yeah, that was my next question. That like individual producers part the Baki on the platform, that money might not go direct consider. Thank you, Campus.
One caso must the aspirate is best be
Exactly. Or like,
Relationship
pension there as well.
exactly. Yeah, so we do have, I mean, the producers can, like in many cases, producer and exporter are the same entity. Or like at some point, it makes sense for them to have their own export license, so that simplifies things. But you do have producers that also, use a cooperative to mill the coffee or something. So they're not the seller vis-a-vis Algrano. But they can still, it's still their coffee, right? They're still delivering it. They can still request. It's just that we're not paying them the right thing.
And when you're evaluating the risk of delivery, I'll find in that the producer delivers their top hero funky
Ships, like is that a metric where the exporter has control their import?
So it's it's the shipment date. So it's not when the producer delivers the coffee, but when it's on board or pre-on board, and like we get the invoice, we would usually pay in the non-prepayment case. So that's what we're modeling. And there's always the risk of certain things that are out of the control of the producer. Like if there's a congestion at the port and there's no containers available, that's not the producer. Like he can deliver on time and the shipment is still there. And same thing with anything where it's relying on the exporter doing their thing on time, right? But by fixing it, we essentially say, could that risk potentially delay with congestion? It's on us because we'll fix it today. What we'll charge you for it. And if it actually goes longer than we modeled it, we implicitly pay for it. And then over time, the model will learn, oh, there's always like congestion in Brazil in November. And then we'll adjust accordingly. But on any specific case, we're not changing the terms after we've signed teaming or the FUF.
Where do you source your thing?
Fair, yeah?
Where do you source your farm?
So it's a combination of foundations, banks, it's our own funds as well. So yeah, it's a combination.
So do you see any risk of having to escalate pricing because your honey source changed?
Because there's a generic risk of like if interest rates are rising and so are any of the interest rates in any agreement that you have, then yes, eventually you have to pass it on. But that's very generic, or like that's true. That's not a producer specific thing, right? That's true everywhere. But essentially our agreements that we have are longer term than the agreements that we have with producers. So we're more flexible in terms of like if we have to adjust, we could do it quicker on the side when we're dispersing and when we're reversing the funds. But a big chunk of it is also we have different agreements with different lenders in terms of some of them are very risk sensitive. So they don't like to take a lot of risk, and then they get a lower interest rate. Whereas if essentially they take all of the risk, and if something goes wrong, Algrano is not taking the write-off on its side, it's on the lender side, then they also get a higher share of the return. And you can be anywhere in between. I can say, well, I'm a lender, I just give Algrano money. And if anything goes wrong, I'll take the write-off, but I'll take the entire return that you're making on dispersing that money to the producers. Versus, I don't want to take any write-off at all. I'll just give you Algrano your money, and if something goes wrong, Algrano will have to pay for it. Well, then your return is also lower. And the classic case somewhere in between, right? If they don't want us to just say, well, it's not my money, I can distribute to anyone I'd like, and it won't hurt me. But they also still want to take some of the risk, or in particular, like a lot of these organizations are also impact driven. So it's not just about financial return, it's also about where the money actually goes and how it improves. So like the studies that we use are also implicit in the results.
So you, on the things you eat it, the fire,
Well, the private?
fire.
Yeah.
Another very adjustment to make like power terrace during the bread of terrace. Asaki were itamyo test trouble say something another good work is yeah. No, that's it. And you
So on the prepaid specifically, no, because it's not the producer paid tariff. It's whoever imports it. So there, no, but in general, right? Everybody's trying to figure out the tariff thing and what does it mean, and then who's bearing what cost, and when will I have to pay for it, and where do I source now versus where do I wait, or how do I, potentially shift, or what's the strategy? But that's, and essentially any U.S. roaster now trying to figure that out and figuring out strategy, but it's not affecting this, except for if you don't buy any coffee, the producer cannot ask for a prepayment. So there's no basis for a prepayment. So sometimes we get the roasters that ask, "Oh, I can't do the prepaid myself, but what can I do so the producer qualifies for a prepayment?" The answer is actually he already a contract. He can ask for a prepaid. And that's potentially now a bit more difficult because everybody's like on a more shorter term horizon.
Do you impose or do you share any guidelines or all requirements about how producers must use the policy?
Not specifically. You do ask them how they say, or how they plan to use it. Then you do regular catch-ups, ask how they actually use it. But we're not. So there's not like constraints on how it enforced, right? Typically, like we also talked to Fernando, for example, they use it to pay the farmers, right? They use the buybacks. Again, that's their operation costs. Yeah.
And you have representatives in each group that you service based with this material on the Erie, from farms, etc.
We built in every origin, so we do 18 origin. You do have some pieces in some origin, but not across the board. But what we do that is also, AFCAR, like other conferences in origin countries, where we eat a lot of them in a couple of days. And then we do farm visits every now and then too, but we don't have coverage across all origin.
Take that closer. Well, that's common use it. The approach you tend to be.
Is this way to empty for that Algrano is gonna take on, or you got to also facilitate financing for coffee at your dots? You did take off.
No, it's only for contracts that we do in Algrano. The main thing is what we had at some point in terms of like the risk you're taking, right? If we're prepaying on something, well, the thing is, we don't have, and we're not in control of when this thing ships, or we can't track it really well if we're not shipping it as well. And the other thing is like we don't know the guy who's supposed to repay us. If whereas if it's our contract, we're paying ourselves.
So would you say to blow this project much larger, the biggest need could be growth, sale the market of the department, or finding more finance? It's more text or e-bets.
So short term, it's the banks, or like with whatever we have today, but more the amount that we can serve. Longer term, the thing where we're confident in this thing working is we have producers coming to us or convincing their roasters to do it through Algrano, just because of the prepaid. Or like they say, well, I can take care of the shipping myself, or we've been working with that roaster for years, right? We have sales or we have provider. But if you as a roaster are agnostic on who hopes your container, delivers it to your warehouse, I as producer, I get a lot more if we can do it through Algrano because they'll prepay. So in that sense, it's sort of a back and forth of it's a win-win-win in terms of like an investor actually gets a decent return, the producer wins because he gets prepayments, and we win because our marketplace becomes more attractive as well for clicks.
Sips away like this is
I think that's
Probably someday after